And that air coming out both those vents is absolutely beautiful. Hey, how are you guys? So we've got our diesel heater for the caravan. We're amongst the colder months at the moment down here in South Australia. We thought, after doing a bit of research, that diesel heater is probably going to be a good thing to have in there. They're actually pretty cheap for the cheaper style Chinese ones. There are obviously tons of different options. This is one of the better of the Chinese ones, if that makes sense. Did a ton of research. It led us to this item with hundreds or thousands of happy people using this item without an issue. So for 165 bucks, I'm happy to give that a go. A little bit skeptical about cutting the hole in the floor, but that hole in the floor can be used for any diesel heater, not just this one. And the plate's going to be the same and the outlets are the same. So I'm not doing anything that can't be reversed or can't be fixed by using a better item. Thought we'll quickly unpack everything now. Had a quick check in there before to make sure everything's there. We're not missing anything. Firstly, we've got our diesel tank. It's obviously got countersunk mounting poles that come through the other side, so you can mount that flat up to something with the screws through, and it's fairly supported. This back section seems fairly thick. This is a 10-litre tank as well. The diesel heaters are actually pretty good on diesel. Don't quote me, but I'll chuck some info up below of basically, you know, a general consensus of what they use roughly. So inside here, got some mounting fixings, nice bolt with that we can drill into something. So there's actually I'm not sure if you can see that, I'll show you a bit closer later, but there's a fitting there with a nut that has a through hole that you can pop into probably any lid or even jerry can. If you've already got a diesel car, it would make sense to run one of these. Be quite good. Even the lid's got a seal on it, doesn't look too bad. I don't know what they'll be like UV wise. You know, a lot of the cheaper stuff will tend to go discolored or go brittle in the UV. See how that goes. You can always upgrade that to an existing diesel jerry can or something you already carry on the caravan or your RV. It was actually packed really well, surprisingly. Tons of foam, tons of bits, tons of stuff in here. We've got our air intake, flexible tube, probably about 1/2 meter, give or take, maybe a little bit more. It probably stretches out a little bit more as well. I've tried to pull it out as much as I can. That's the air intake. So the diesel heater itself has one outlet, and I'll go through with you a bit later on how exactly the diesel heater works if you haven't already found out. But this air inlet can either be directional for the intake on the inside of the van or the outlet as well. Comes with a T-piece, all pretty good, pretty well fitting. Hose clamps and everything as well, so you can actually come out of the heater and tee it off into 2 outlets. Flush fitting outlets, directional as well. They actually turn on there, angle them sideways, so we're going to have one blowing back and one blowing forward in the van, and they just pop onto here as well. So they're pretty good. 2 directional outlets, flush fitting, bag of nuts and bolts. I would be surprised and excited at the same time if everything we need's in there, fingers crossed. So this is the outside air intake, so that's where it's drawing air from outside the van through this pipe. I have seen people say that upgrading that pipe's a good idea. Obviously that's sitting outside under the van where it can be damaged. You really want to keep that intake as clean as you can. Our other pipe is our exhaust pipe, so it looks like bendable and moldable as well. Whether that'll be long enough we'll see, depends on where you're fitting it obviously as well. Got our mounting plate, so this attaches to the floor. Our exhaust and intake from outside the van go through here, and our fuel as well, and a bit of wiring comes outside for the fuel pump as well. It's good. So our hole's going to be about this size. From what I can work out, it needs to be about 100 mil. Should be able to fit both of those through a 100 mil hole hopefully. Our wiring, it's all pre-made wiring loom. So we've got our main plug for the diesel heater, pre-fused, positive and negative. We'll probably chuck a better fuse on there. Our plug for the diesel heater, our plug for the fuel pump, and then our plug for the controller as well. Our fuel suction side, so this could obviously attach to the jerry can like I was saying, or you can trim it off to go inside the supplied diesel tank. So it's got quite a good fitting on the top, real solid. Another rubber gasket as well. We've got our muffler. Noise wise these aren't too bad, but the muffler is definitely something you need to use. So it is a straight through muffler. It is packed from what I can tell, I reckon. The other thing to note is I would assume that the muffler would mount like that. The muffler actually mounts like this. There's a little liquid drain hole, so if any condensation builds up underneath, it all drains out of here and doesn't rust out the system. It is important to note that the muffler gets mounted in this orientation, so we'll keep that in mind when we're fitting. Some mounting brackets for the muffler, our fuel pump. Now they're pretty specific on how the fuel pump needs to be fit. It needs to actually not be flat, it needs to be on a bit of an angle, and there is a directional arrow on there as well. So it can be mounted any orientation around that way, but it needs to be on a bit of an angle. So this little cylinder in here that pumps the fuel does create bubbles, and you really don't want bubbles in the system, so you keep it on a bit of an angle like this, and that just lets the bubbles escape and not be an issue. So we'll make sure that we are going to be mounting that in that orientation. The other thing it has in the bag, we've got a very basic fuel filter, more of a strainer by the look of it. So we need to fit that in line with the fuel, and it does supply a mounting bracket for the fuel pump as well. We'll give that a bit of a lube up and try and fit that in there. Nice tight fit. So it's a nice solid rubber mount. We've actually got some other tubing. These pumps are known to be fairly loud. They sort of make like a clicking noise, and I've seen lots of people complain about that. So there are lots of tricks to quieten these down and stop that clicking noise from vibrating through the van. That's the only loud bit. The fan's almost non-existent from what I've read on the actual unit. It's just the fuel pump can be the only thing that might annoy you. There's a couple of tricks that I'll go through with you later to make the fuel pump a little bit quieter. We'll give that the best chance of being as silent as possible. Lastly, we've got some pretty average looking fuel hose. There's two types of fuel hose that come with the units that you can buy. Most of the time you can tell in the listing pictures. I'll put a link up of where we got ours, the most recommended and cheapest unit that we could find, because they do all look pretty much the same. So fuel hose wise, we're going to run with this for now, see how we go. There is actually a hard plastic line that you can get as well in some kits, and you can buy that separately. I think it was about 20 bucks. I'll put a link below as well so you can see that. But the hard plastic line is 3mm ID, and this softer tube is 5mm ID. So the hard plastic one I have seen is definitely favorable for the kits, but as a note for that, it does pass a bit of the vibrations from the pump through the chassis, and you can notice the clicking of the pump a little bit more on the harder line, whereas the softer line you don't. So we're probably going to put that into some convolute under the van to keep it safe so it can't get hit with any rocks or anything, and keep that nice and clear. Okay, and this is the unit. So I'll show you where I got it from. I'll put a link down below. It's a diesel heater. There's lots of different color skins you can get for these. This is the 5 kilowatt one, which might be a bit big for our van. XMZ/D2 is the model, 12 volt 40 watt, and that's inside the van. So that's really good. Lastly is our little control unit. There's a ton of different control units I saw. This digital control unit, it's had a bit more functionality over some of the other ones. It's also got a remote as well. It has time, temperature. There are rotary style knobs. It's actually quite a complex unit. The more you look into it, the more you learn, and the more you realize that it does and looks after itself and how it runs, and it can be a bit temperamental if you don't get things exactly right. So we're going to try our best to get everything installed in the best way we can. I'll go through some instructions with you and some tips as well from what I found out for the installation to try and keep it as trouble-free as possible. We'll get all this back in the box and we'll get inside the van and start working out where we're going to put it. So this is our couch area. We're going to have the diesel heater just underneath. So we've got to try and find a really nice place that's going to be clear underneath the floor, because this is actually upside down. It mounts that way up. So the air intake and the exhaust both come through the floor, and there is a mounting plate that we're going to use to make the hole in the floor as well. The hole in the floor is going to be about 100mm diameter, so we're going to hole saw a fairly large hole in the floor, which I'm a bit nervous about. But the first thing we need to do is find an appropriate place for this to sit. Our basic workings of the diesel heater, our air from inside the caravan gets sucked in through here, through a fan. You should be able to see the fan in there. I'm not sure if you can see the fan. I can pop this off. So you can see the fan there. That draws air from the van into the unit, and so that draws air from the van into the unit and around this heated element, and the wind basically passes through these fins, warms up, and then comes out into the van. So there's no combustion that is inside the van. The combustion is inside these heat sinks. In an area inside the heat sinks, there's a glow plug, diesel glow plug, and basically the air from outside the van comes in through here, and the diesel fuel comes in through this little hose here, goes into that heat sink area, separate to where the air's flowing through here. Cold air from outside the van and fuel comes in, gets combusted and then it gets exhaust out through this pipe, and then you want to obviously channel that away outside the caravan. So in here, out there, outside the caravan, and then that heats up that element in there, and then the air, this fan here runs air over that element on the outside of it inside this plastic tube and blows it out. So it actually gets quite warm. Everything I can read says that even maybe this is going to be a little bit big for what we need, and obviously we've got a fairly, you know, decent sized van. This one is a 5 kilowatt and it's a diesel obviously, and there's the model number for you, XMZD2, 12 volt, 40 watt, 5 kilowatt, and they're all pretty much made in China. So there's a wide array of different ones you can get, but this is the one that we found had the best reviews. This one was only $165, so I mean really you can't go wrong. So what we need to do is we need to find a good spot for it. We're going to do some measurements. We're going to sit this where we think is going to be convenient. Whether we go something like this, I'm going to need to measure down below and make sure that that's going to be clearing. I know there's a chassis rail that, so this is our inner wheel arch. The chassis rail obviously runs along the inside of this. So I'm going to need to make sure, yeah, we've got plenty of room down there for that. Go down underneath in a second, measure how far off the wall we come until we hit the chassis rail, and we'll find a good spot, make sure there's no hoses. Obviously there's our water filling hoses run down in here as well into the tanks. The other thing is the outlets. We're going to put one here and one here, and we're going to have angled covers that it gives you. I'm going to have one facing this way and one facing us. So our bed is this way and the kids' bunks are that way. So we should be pretty good. Obviously the table goes here, and that's all going to be hidden underneath our feet and under the table. So that should work well. Next step, we'll go into the van, have a look, see how much room we've got. This is our dining room window here. So we'll be popping under here to have a look. Our inner guard obviously finishes just on the other side of this chassis rail here, and you can see that inner guard there that was inside, and we popped it just next to it on this side, so it finishes just under here. So this is the only other chassis rail that we got to worry about to make sure we don't interfere with that. The other option is if we come in a little bit, but it's pretty busy under here for everything else. So this looks like it's going to be our only spot. This is our only spot, I reckon. We've got a fairly large area there. We can run the exhaust out and sideways, and we can attach it to this out sideways, which is good. The only issue I can see with that is our window is up here. We don't really want the fumes sort of coming up and up into the windows. So they do say in the instructions not to face the exhaust or the air intake that way. Obviously it's going to collect a heap of crud from when you're driving. So really you want to be facing them backwards if you can. We'll take a couple of measurements, and then the next one, pop back in, have a look, see what we got. So I'm going to do some marking. 19 centimeters off the inner wheel arch. So we're about here to here is our chassis rail that runs along here. So we do have a space here if we can fit it in there. The second chassis rail was 79 centimeters. All right, so we've got a fairly large space in the middle. I'm going to stick to this one here. We're either going to go on this side of the chassis rail or this side of the chassis rail. So I'll sit it in there and we'll see how we go for space. So the hole is basically sort of stopping here. Main chassis rail is running anywhere from about here onwards. So this is where we have our chassis rail here, and we've got our main chassis rail that runs along here as well, level with the inner guard. So we can pop out here. I can't see any issue with having it like that off the top of my head. Our other option obviously is to bring it on this side. It's going to be much the same. The only benefit I guess we'll have of that, if we can have it on a bit of an angle, but I think we're going to keep it about there so we can draw some air off the end there. The outlet's going to have a T-piece on the end here, and one bit's going to come here and the other bit's going to go up there and out here. So we've got an outlet on each side. After a bit of measuring around and stuffing around, we have decided to put it here. I reckon this is going to be the best place now. So it's really worth spending a bit of time measuring everything out. So on the edge of this guard, we have a chassis rail here that's quite thick, and then another one here. So where I wanted to put it, it was going to be really close to being in between these two chassis rails. So instead, we're going to have it on a bit of an angle here. Our pipes are going to go down here. We're pretty clear of everything. We'll give it one more measure before we make any cuts. We'll go back underneath and have a quick measure as well, and then we can pop a hole through the floor. there it is, it's done. Fingers crossed she all fits. We'll give that a bit of a vacuum, bit of a tidy up, and we'll give the unit a bit of a test fit too. All cleaned up. We'll get this positioned where we need it. So I'm thinking that should be right there. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but this little cutout looks like where the wiring needs to go, or can go through the same hole. I'm probably gonna, so this chassis rail that runs along here, I'm probably going to pop a little hole down just through here, chop the wiring, little thin hole through here, then silicone it up so it's on the inside of the chassis rail, which is where the fuel pump's going to be, rather than going out there and then having to duck under the chassis rail. So that should be good. What I'll probably do now, I'm trying to work out whether I'll need to, or whether I should get a razor blade and cut out around the outside of the plate. Just not sure about the temperature of the plate when the unit's running. I'm going to have some heat proof sealant underneath the plate, but I'm just trying to work out now whether I'll cut a square just a little bit bigger than this plate so that this plate sits actually on the wood instead of on the vinyl. So we'll work that out now. Plate all lined up. We're going to pop some little holes down for the screws and the plate. After a bit of messing around, we've got a position that we're happy with, which is going to be this angle here. Next bit is this little thing here. It's just a downpipe or gutter fitting from Bunnings. I saw another YouTuber install video and he used one of these, and I really like the idea of it. So basically that's 100mm metal that just slots in there nicely, which is really good. And then I'll fill out here with our heat proof sealant, and I'm actually going to fill inside here with the heat proof sealant as well. That should give us a bit of sealing, and I'll go underneath and just do a ring around. We'll get that sorted in a tick. The other thing I'm going to do is just pop a little vent on this wall, this side under here. Got a gap on top of the wheel arch. It goes all the way around to there and outside, and can vent through the drawers as well, which is good. And that one goes under the bed. So with a hole here, we should be able to channel some air so it can suck from multiple places, which is good. Now I saw some videos about people using a heat-proof sealant between the plate and the floor, the mounting plate. So I did a bit of research, and this is probably one of the better options that I could find. I'm sure there's other options as well, so do your own research and make sure you're happy with what you're using. But this is just to separate the heat from the floor, where the exhaust is coming out the bottom of the floor as well under the caravan. So this is what I got here. This is Sika appliance sealant. So it's a thermal silicone sealant, and I'm not sure if you can see that up the top, but from -50 to plus 250 degrees. So easy to apply, which is obviously a major thing. It's flexible, high adhesion and temperature resistant. So to me, that's sort of the perfect thing to use for keeping the heat off of the floor and just protecting that floor as well. So we'll use a bit of this pretty liberally, I'd say, and I'll put a link below to this product. I personally just got this from Bunnings, and I think it was about $12 or $13 from memory. I'll put the link below. Just chuck some gloves on. I'm gonna put some on the finger and seal it around part of the wood that we've cut out there. It's nice and thick. Cap in. We'll just spread some of that out. We've got nice coverage there. We'll just give it a bit of a seal around these. Depending on how the exhaust lays out in here, I'm probably going to put a little bit of a shield in front of the air intake as well, and maybe even this bit. We'll see how far it comes down. Come out right where our underlights are, underbody lights, so I'll just have to move them out of the way. I'll reroute that when the time comes. So they're all sealed up. Made as much mess as I could. I'm happy with that. That looks good. All sealed up. No water can get into the wood or anything around there, so that's good. Next bit, we'll just start looking at getting the fixings bolted in for the heater to be bolted to the plate. They supply you some studs, so we'll put the short end into the unit itself. Got a spare one, which is good. Now I've seen other people get caught out once this is slotted into the floor, getting stuck trying to affix the air intake and the exhaust and the fuel line to this one. So what I'm going to do is fasten them on first and then drop it in. and that should be fairly easy. Before I bolt the plate down to the floor, I'm just going to sit this the right way on here, and I'm going to get that bolted on, and then I'm going to put the exhaust and intake on, get these all nice and tight, and then I'm going to lower that down. Hopefully I should be able to still access these screws. Get these little nuts on. Grab a little 10mm and we'll nip them up, and that's just pushing against the seal. So it's worth noting as well, just in case you haven't figured it out, the fuel will come in next to the intake, away from the heat. Obviously we need to be really careful not to let that fuel hose get anywhere near the exhaust, which may seem obvious, but it's just worth saying just in case, because it's probably quite easy to do if it's moving around and everything. So we'll pay special attention to that once we get it through. All right, we'll nip them up, not too tight. All right, we're squashing the gasket nicely and they're all nipped up tight. So now chuck our exhaust on, straighten that out. So we probably want to try and have that somewhere where it's easy to get to the clamp if we ever need to redo it up, and put that there. Probably do that up by hand for now. It's nice and tight. Our next bit will be our air intake. Hose clamp's just a little big to start with, although this one's not too bad. So we're going to have that on there. So we'll probably have it poking out this way. Put that there, so it's away from the fuel intake as well. So that's those two. Next we'll just slip the fuel line on. We'll give ourselves a little bit of length. All right, we want to slip that on there. Probably going to keep that away from the exhaust, like I said. Definitely going to upgrade that. Think about changing over to the hard fuel line, which is apparently a little bit better. We'll see how we go for noise so far with the fuel pump on this line. Let's drop her down. So I've got the gasket sitting there ready to go. Give it another little bead around the edge. And we'll wipe away the excess. Drop this bit down. That wasn't too bad. Looks like I can still get to the screws, which is good. So I'm just going to put them in loosely and just make sure that everything's still got clearance underneath, and then we can nip them up. All right, we'll quickly pop down underneath and make sure we got clearance. Cool, all looking pretty good under here. So everything's popped out nicely. We've got our intake and our exhaust. Probably going to do something like this with the intake, and I'll work something out nice with the exhaust once we've got that all tightened up. And you can see up in there, obviously, it'd be a little bit difficult to get to the hose clamps without fixing them on first. So obviously, if you didn't have this guard that I had on, you'd be able to get to them a little bit easier, but I'm pretty happy having that guard on. It's got a good bit of protection in there for everything as well. Cool, we can go in there and nip that down. Nipple them down by hand. They're all tightened up now. Give you a look from up here. So you can just get to the plate on top. Sorry, there's not much light in here. All looking good. Okay, so next we're going to start planning. We've got that unit all bolted in now, which is good. We're going to start planning our little air outlets. So I'm going to have one here. I'm going to try and have one here and have one here. We do have the T-piece. We've got some flexible pipe. And then we've got our air outlets. So the air outlets are angled, so they rotate on the surface, so you can have them pointing out different ways. I'm hoping we can have one here pointing towards the front of the van, and then one over here pointing towards the back. So that should give a nice bit of airflow out. Keep your feet warm as well when you're eating. I think having them down low might be a little bit better at first glance. We'll probably try and keep them around about the same height as the unit itself, the outlet on there. We'll go ahead and mark out some holes. There are kits that you can buy. Again, I'll put some links down below of what I found. You can buy exhaust kits, so extensions and new mufflers. It's all that cheap that if anything fails, it's quite easy to replace. And being a heater that you're not relying on to stay alive, for instance, if it does break down, you can be without it until you can get somewhere where you can order something new again. The heater took like less than a week postage, I think, from memory, so it was pretty fast. It's all obviously here in Australia. That's the other thing, be careful where you're ordering from, because a lot of them will be overseas sellers. So if you make sure you order something from Australia, just look at the feedback, look at the postage time. Again, my links below will be from Australian sellers. That'll just make it a bit easier and a bit quicker as well. An outlet just here with a sort of a 45-degree bend, just over 45, and then this one can come out and then out here. So I think that's going to work out pretty well. Piping length should be fine. All right, I'm going to go drill some holes. Again, we'll try and keep these fairly symmetrical. That's our middle bit. So there's our 2 points for drilling. Time to pop some holes through. Have that like that. I mean, you could come up like that if you wanted to, but That's going to shoot back to the kids to the back of the van, and then this other one on this side is going to go the other way. Just setting the outtake on. So this one's going to come straight up into the outlet here, and then after I know that I've got enough piping, I'm going to drill the other vent and run that piping as well. Looking down, intake goes on. Air outlets there. Just starting to sort the fuel tank out now. We have a spot for mounting the fuel tank on the back. It's going to be on the back of the van. I'll show you in a sec. So this is just the fuel drain for the tank, and this little fitting that's supplied with it is going to come out that hole, and then a flange nut we'll do up over it, and we'll have a nice neat one. I'll show you what it looks like once I've got that popped in. All right, so as you can imagine, probably going to be pretty difficult to reach my hand in that hole, which I can't, and get this little outlet from the inside out so we can do the nut up. So a little trick that I've seen is just some wire or a coat hanger, poke that through the hole, and out the top. So got it going in one end and out the hole. And then what we can do is we can sit this, so we've got to have the O-ring on here obviously. We'll sit that on the metal, jiggle that down. That's sitting from the inside outwards. Probably could have gone a little bit bigger with the hole. Carefully twist that, pull it out, see if we can get it to bite on the thread. So now we're ready to put that O-ring on and the flange nut and help that pull through. We have a nice fitting. So you can see we've got the fitting pulled through. Probably could have been a bit softer with the pliers on that one. I'll smooth that off before we put the fuel hose on, but that's pulled all the way through. It's actually sort of cut its own little thread into the fuel tank. Got this O-ring, which I've given a little bit of a lubrication, sitting on the outlet there, and then we'll sit this flange nut on there and we'll pull that up tight. So there we've got ourselves a nice, hopefully leak-proof outlet on our fuel tank, all done. So it's just probably time to think about how to fix that to the caravan. We're going to mount this on the rear bar behind the spare wheels, and it should look sort of, not out of place, so it should look like it's meant to be there. So on the back, we're going to be having our fuel tank sitting right there, nice and flush. It's going to be behind both spare wheels. You won't be able to see it. There'll just be, obviously, the other spare wheel will come down here. I'm going to have a flat plate that I'm going to use these 3 fixing holes. There's 3 of them there. And then I'm going to come back down here and techie into the bar. And that should be a nice flat plate holding that up in place. It'll be resting on the bar, so it doesn't need to support the weight. And we've got the spare wheels there in the caravan there, and it's too fat to fit down between the bar and the caravan. So I think that's gonna be perfect. Got our fuel outlet here, so the fuel can come down in split tubing down here and under the van. We'll cable tie that all out the way. Alrighty, we're ready to mount up the fuel tank on the back of the van. I'll show you what I've done here. So in the middle is where we'll be mounting it, like I've shown you before. Basically, I just went down to our local aluminium supplier's place and I've grabbed a sheet of checker plate to match the back of the van. I've just given it a lick of black paint. It's not the best job, but it's going to be out of sight behind the wheel anyway. It's going to be sitting like that. And like I said, the other spare wheel comes around here, and they both spare wheels meet in the middle, so you will just be able to see the cap behind it, but that's about it. Once we've got that up, we're just going to throw some techies, 3 techies I think we'll do, maybe 4. I'll gauge it there. And also the other thing I'm doing is I'm going to sit a bit of rubber strip that I actually had left over from when I had my large rooftop tent on the rack. I'm just going to sit that underneath the fuel tank here as well, just so it's not sitting metal on metal. And I reckon that should do for now. I've run the fuel line up here. I've got some hose clamps for that as well. The fuel line sort of goes down under the van and along the chassis rail, or cable tied up the whole way down. I've got the fuel pump sitting on the desk, and I'm going to go through and do some soundproofing for that as well. Do everything I can to make that as soundproof as possible. They're a pretty known not issue, but they're quite loud and it's hard to silence. So I'm going to do everything I can to make the pump as quiet as possible, and then we can throw that up under the caravan. All fitted up now. Tank fit up nicely, it clears the wheel. We're just going to make a number plate bracket for this spare wheel holder here now. It's actually really a lot stronger than I thought. Right up flush against that back wheel. And once the spare wheel's on, I'm pretty sure you're probably not even going to see it except for the blue cap. Go ahead, and I'm going to quickly knock this job off first, and then we'll chuck that spare wheel on, and then we're done at the back. Excellent, with the spare wheels all mounted up. I'm happy with that. It's come out good. Cool, diesel tanks all mounted, spare wheels all mounted, number plates mounted, knocking some stuff off the list now, which is good. I'll give you a look at the setup. So number plate's going to be up here. We just need to make a number plate light that'll sit up on here and just shine down. So the number plate was over here, but having two spare wheels now obviously blocks where the number plate was. So we've had to move that onto the second spare wheel. I was a bit iffy about taking the second spare wheel, but I think it's only going to help, and I don't have to run it all the time, so we can pull it off if we ever need to. It's easy enough. And the diesel tank, nice and neat back there. It's worked out really well, looking pretty full on the back. See if I can get a shot of diesel tank just sitting off the frame and on a rubber mat on the rear bar and all bolted down. So it really is a good spot for it, can't go anywhere, which is cool. So now we need to just do the fuel pump and finish off inside and we're done. Underneath it's all done now. So we've got our exhaust coming out, and that's nice and firm, comes out and around with no too tight of bends. I've tried to be as smooth as possible with the bends. And then we've got our air intake. I've got a little sheet that's going to techie onto here just to shield that from oncoming dust. So that's our intake, no tight bends. And then we've got our fuel line coming up and in, all protected with split tubing, and our wiring goes up into the floor just here as well. So now we've just got the inner part to do and we're all done. We're pretty much ready to put some diesel in now, so we're going to fill up the tank and let it prime all the way down to fuel lines, and we'll help it if we need to get down into the down to the pump and then most of the way down to fuel lines. Diesel tank all filled up now, so what we'll do is we'll go and undo a line closer to the main unit in under the caravan, and we'll just pop a line off. We'll let that gravity feed down through the fuel lines, and then we know that the fuel's got through to the pump, because it was really important to let the fuel get to the pump before you start the pump up so it's not running dry. Just laying under the back of the van, you can see our fuel filter there. We're going to wait for that to slowly start to fill up. We'll pop a line off and let that fuel come through. And the tank's obviously higher than the rest of the lines and the unit, so it should gravity feed quite easily. We've gone to great lengths to soften the blow of our fuel pump sound. Hopefully that pays off. Then you can see that we've run the lines all the way down to the front there. Under the front here, I'm going to take the fuel line off, let that gravity feed back down to that point. It should go most of the way. The only thing I'm not sure about is if the fuel pump is closed or open at the moment when there's no power to it, so we'll find out. But you can see everything else here. We've got the exhaust all mounted up in the air intake, and I think, like I said before, I'm just going to make a little shield that comes down here, a little flat shield to block that air intake. Ideally, if you can face that backwards, it'd be better, but if I faced it backwards, it'd just be near the exhaust, so I went with that. You can see that the exhaust doesn't protrude out the side of the caravan. It's not lower than any point on the caravan as well, which is cool, so it's fairly well protected under there. In here, you can see that the outlets go on the outside here, which is good, and then our wiring disappears into here and comes out and under the bed and to the batteries, which are all over here. We've got our little screen mounted up here. We're going to hide that wiring behind the seat there. We'll screw that in there and we'll get the seats all back together. Cool guys, we're pretty much done now, fingers crossed. We've got all the wiring run through to under the bed. We've got the screen mounted, we've got power to the screen, it's turned on, which is good. It's all fused and everything can run out the way so it can't rub through or you know, interfere with anything else. The unit's all mounted, I'm happy with that. The fuel line's mounted, fuel pump, fuel filter all the way back to the tank. The tank's full of diesel. I've just spent a couple of minutes under the van priming the fuel lines with diesel as well. Basically all I did was pull the line off after the filter and before the fuel pump, so right in between them, and I've let the fuel gravity feed through and fill up the fuel filter. As I've connected it back up, it's drizzled down into the fuel pump as well, so the fuel pump's not dry. That's important to remember when you're first priming the system, because there's a sequence of events you need to do with the screen to prime the system properly, and if you do that with no fuel in the system, you're going to kill your pump, because the pump does use the fuel for lubrication. So we'll go through the screen now and we'll prime the system for the first time. So I haven't done anything yet. It's just got power. To be honest, I've just set the time as well, so that's all we've done, and we're going to prime it for the first time now. So the screen's all mounted up here, got the time all set on there, and we've got some just display units, and I'll put a link to a really good video that I found showing you how to set it up in much more depth. I'll go over the first initial startup procedures. I've just set the time. Time's quite easy to set. So you just press settings, it'll flash the digits and you just okay your way through there in 24-hour time. It's got a timer on, timer off setting as well. And if you just leave that for a couple of seconds, it'll go back to its home screen. Alrighty, we're back to our home screen. So this initial first time startup, which you only want to do the first time to prime the lines when they're empty. And we may have to go through this procedure a few times to get all the fuel up through the lines. But all we do is we hit OK and down, and then we tap up and we can just hear the fuel pump knocking now. And that's going to try and prime the system up to the top of the unit. Fuel pump's just priming now. You can see the little fuel pump icon down the bottom here, and it's just priming all the lines at the moment. So this is the second prime that I've gone through. My fuel line's probably about the maximum length that it can be, so I've needed to do it twice. So you may not need to do it twice if you've got a shorter run.
A few moments later.
Cool, so starting up for the first time now that we've primed the system, you can push and hold the power button and it'll turn on. What it'll do, the screen will light up. It'll have all these icons come up. So you'll have the fan. It says that we're blowing and sucking air in and out the exhaust. Then the fan on the actual unit's on. It's also got the glow plug symbol on. The glow plug will just warm up for a little while before it switches the fuel pump on. Once the fuel pump's on, you'll see this icon come up here. It just needs to basically, like a normal diesel motor, needs to heat that glow plug up hot enough that when it starts injecting diesel into the unit, it can combust and start some warming. So we've just chucked ours on now. Everything seems to be working really well. Some other things you can do by pushing OK, it'll show you the temperature in the cabin, so in the caravan here. And then here it says what we've got the unit set at. So, 18 degrees in the caravan at the moment. We've got 28 degrees set at. And then we can go, okay, that's our voltage at the unit. And this is any error codes that have come up too. All the error codes are in the manual as well if you need them. Power wise, if I can get a good shot of that. So on initial startup, when the diesel heater was heating up that glow plug, we were pulling about 7 or 8 amps. And then now that that unit's running with the fan, just at normal operating temperature, normal operating everything else, we're using 4.5 amps, I think it touched, and that's slowly going down. So power wise, pretty respectable really. So the unit's still running now. I'm just missing one hose clamp, which I'll do to finish this install off. We've sealed up the hole where the wiring goes through underneath, and our wiring and our air can suction in from in here as well. You can hear the fan a little bit in there. Once you put the covers on and that seat goes on, I honestly don't think you're going to be able to hear it at all. We'll go outside and see what we can hear out there. So over here, a little bit of noise. See the exhaust is just starting to change colour. Our air intake, you can hear a bit of sucking as well. Out of that exhaust. Everything looks really good so far. So around here, right down near the pump, you can hear, I'm not sure if you can hear that. We can just hear it, just. And I did notice in the van, I can't hear it at all with the unit running. So I'm really, really happy about that. Worked out really well. Back in the van. We're still progressively going down in the amps, so we're down to 3.8, which is good. That air coming out both those vents is absolutely beautiful. Everything seems to be working really well at the moment. I'm actually going to chuck the seat back on here and see what the sound's like. I definitely can't hear the fuel pump at the moment though, which is absolutely amazing. Well, to summarise guys, that diesel heater is absolutely amazing. We've just had a long weekend away in Tarawi where we gave the heater a run for its first time. Over the weekend it was freezing cold there in the nights, and even during the day it was fairly cold as well, being winter here in South Australia. The heater came in really handy. I can't stress how nice it made it in here. It was really good. It kept the kids happy, kept the missus happy, kept me really happy. We actually ran it for a fair bit over the weekend. We went through a tank and a half of diesel, and that's with me running it flat out pretty much the whole weekend. So we only turned it off when we went out for all driving, but other than that it was pretty much on most of the time. We did end up turning it off once or twice deep into the night when the caravan was absolutely smoking hot in here. Yeah, it did absolutely amazing. I can't fault it. The only issue we've had after a couple of weeks of it in the van, we had a fault code. I think it was error 10 from memory that came up. Quick search tell you that the line isn't primed or it's got air in it. I did worry a little bit that maybe the fuel line we'd used, which was a bit iffy. A lot of people changed to a hard line and we've got the softer line, but I just went through the settings and I primed the fuel line again and gave it a start up, and it started up first time. And every single time after that it started, first pop, it turns on, starts up, the fan comes on the unit in the caravan, it heats the glow plug up and then starts putting diesel through, and the fan ramps up, and within, you know, a couple of minutes the caravan's toasty warm in here. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a bit of a novelty, really. It's really cool. So if you're on the fence about thinking of installing a diesel heater, I'd strongly recommend it. Can't fault it. Really good for that kind of money. For 100, I think ours was like 150, 160 bucks. A little bit of stuff around with the installation. Once you get it all right, it's worth every moment. So yeah, 100% recommended. Easy. Thanks, guys.